Hello, my name is Gülşah Kulalı, and this video is to summarize third chapter of Business Finance 1 book. The name of our chapter is Cost, Volume and Profit Analysis. In order to understand what is cost, volume and profit analysis, we have some assumptions that we make before we make any kind of analysis. So, the goods and services consumed by the world population are produced by millions of businesses around the world, established and operated by the same goal of profit maximization. The first sentences of this chapter is this one. With the goal of profit maximization, companies are try to operate in a manner that no money or no time is wasted. So their profits are maximized, and so their value of their company is maximized. So they try to operationalize the amount of goods and amount of services that they produce and sell, given the facts that demand, supply, and the average sales price, average production cost, average selling units, average delivery time, so on. So we have some constraints and we have some aims. So we can talk about techniques, these cost, value, profit techniques, to understand the idea of how can we reach a optimum point in a production or optimum point in a selling sales units. So the first assumption is the sales price per unit is constant. We assume that sales price per unit that we produce is not changing over time. Second assumption is variable cost per unit is fixed per unit, and fixed costs are constant. We assume that variable and fixed costs are not changing over time. We have to differentiate variable costs and fixed costs. I will get to this point in the next slide. So just now, we please try to think about sales price is not changing over time, and costs associated with the production is not changing over time. Third one is the firm sells all units produced. We assume that all the production is sold. So no inventory is remaining, not sold or not out of season. Fourth assumption is the cost of structure is constant, meaning that costs change only by the level of activity, not by the other kinds of constraints. If the level of activity here means that level of production, if we produce more, then the cost is like something like that. And if we produce low units, low quantities, the cost is like that, not any other factor. The fifth assumption is if there is more than one product produced and sold, the sales mix of these products is constant. It means that if we produce 5 different goods, then we always produce these 5 kinds of goods, each one at each level and we sell the quantities of each different types of goods is fixed. Sixth assumption is costs and revenues remain constant within a specified production level, which is usually called as the relevant range. So the costs and revenues remain constant within a specified production level. These 6 assumptions are made in order to do some calculations, but I have to say that these 6 assumptions is not true for real life. In real life, for companies, for example, the sales price per unit is not constant, or the firm rarely sells all the units that it produces, or fixed costs are not constant all the time. So because of these assumptions are not very really applicable to the real life, we have to think cost, volume, and profit analysis is a tool that cannot give us an exact number of goods and services that we have to produce. We have to deal with the limitation of these assumptions are not so true for real life. So when we get some calculations and when we get some results, we have to think that it's a number, but not the exact number that we will have in the end in real life. It is just an approach to see the about numbers, not the exact numbers. We said that variable cost and fixed cost are 2 kinds of costs that we talk about in this chapter. Fixed costs are fixed at a quantity. At any quantity of production, fixed cost is the same level. So if we can talk about that. If we have 10 person to do the production, we have to pay their rents even if they produce less or more. We can talk about variable costs, on the other hand, are increasing with the level of quantity. If we go right hand side in the quantity dimension of the variable cost figure, if we go to right, it means that we increase the quantity that we produce. So if we make a line, a direct line to the variable cost line, we can see that if we increase the quantity, then our variable cost is increasing. This is a cost volume profit equation. This equation tells us so many things in this chapter, where P is the sales price per unit and Q is the quantity produced and sold. If we multiply them, we have P multiplied by Q, that is our left hand side of our equation. In the right, we have VC. This is variable costs multiplied by the quantity, and fixed cost is a fixed cost. We remember that here fixed cost is not changing, so we do not multiply it by the quantity, but variable cost is changing by quantity, so in the equation we multiply it with the quantity here. And if we add operating profit to this cost, then we have how much we should produce in order to get that much of a profit, or in order to start to have some profit. When the total revenue and total cost is equal to each other, at that point we call it break-even quantity, and we calculate break-even quantity with using this equation. Then we have contribution margin, which is a sales revenue minus total variable costs. And we have margin of safety. It is actual or budgeted sales minus break-even sales, or actual or budgeted sales quantity minus break-even sales quantity. And lastly, in this chapter, we will talk about cash break-even quantity. Here we saw the break-even quantity, but if we talk about cash break-even quantity, we have to talk about depreciation expense. Depreciation expense is an expense, but it is not in the form of cash. So we have to subtract it from the fixed costs and divide it by price minus variable costs. Here in the figure, we see that cash break-even quantity is less than operating break-even quantity. You can see the purple line here. It is a total cash cost line, and when it is it equals to total cash revenue, we have 25,000 in this figure. We have reached cash break even. So this chapter is just for to understand what is break-even point, what is fixed and variable cost, and what is the relationship between them, to understand to how managers make some strategies over quantities using that kind of techniques. I hope this video is helpful for your studies.